With a 20% modal split, transit usage equals car usage in Copenhagen. There's a natural symbiosis between bicycling and transit. Conflicts are reduced by setting cycle tracks behind transit stops so that cyclists will have access to transit but will not create conflicts with pedestrians getting on and off the buses. Bicycle parking is provided at transit stations, and Copenhagen taxicabs have bike racks that can carry 2 bikes. Bicycle parking areas are provided within the street, and special pavers on sidewalks are detectable by people with visual disabilities, with intersecting pavers leading to the doors of buildings. Pedestrian refuge medians are common in Copenhagen, with individual sets of pedestrian signals for crossing each direction of travel. This provides safety and efficiency. Danish countdown pedestrian signal heads use red numbers to show the remaining time until the walk indication, with green numbers used to show the remaining duration of the walk time. At complex intersection, pedestrian refuges are provided with individual sets of pedestrian signals, each with their own timing, to cross individual halves of the street. This is very efficient as it allows motorists to continue on one half of the street if a pedestrian crossing is not yet taking place. The Danish have off-street trails, for example around lakes or using old railroad rights-of-way. Some of these old rail trails result in mid-block unsignalized crossings. However, refuge medians are provided to make it easier for cyclists to make a safe crossing. The off-street trail system complemented the on-street facilities we saw in Copenhagen. The Danish are very proud of their environmental efforts, and we're pleased to point out that the water in Copenhagen Harbor is clean enough to swim in. Previously, this area had been an oil refinery and was now being redeveloped into a very popular residential area. On some of the railroad corridors, it was necessary to replace the original bridges to provide additional clearance over the streets. This provided opportunities for new, modern, contemporary public art bridges. Overall, what we saw reflected decades of efforts to make the city more bicycle-friendly. As a result of a significant process, a bicycle trail through the Copenhagen Cemetery was finally built. We were standing adjacent to the grave of Hans Christian Andersen watching the cyclists ride through the cemetery, including with their families, and having a nice, pleasant experience. The next city we visited was Berlin, Germany. They have an extensive off-street cycle track system and use red pavement markings where the cycle track makes crossings of busy streets. For example, here's a major arterial where motorists are yielding to bicyclists making the crossing. Bicyclists are also allowed to use 60 miles worth of the bus lane system in Berlin. The use of the red infill bike lane markings provided an additional cue to motorists that they would be crossing a bicycle facility. In particular, we were very interested in the rotated bike lane markings we saw in Berlin, as opposed to the longitudinal only bike lane markings we see here in the United States. These markings are rotated to provide a cue to a motorist who would be turning from the major street into the intersecting street or driveway, or entering the major street from the intersecting street or driveway. Overall, this may be a very low-cost method to increase motorist awareness that they will be crossing a bicycle facility. We also saw many neighborhood traffic calming signs. The next city we visited was Potsdam, Germany, a very historic city adjacent to Berlin. The red pavement markings define the bicycle portion of the sidewalk. Bike lane markings are provided across this ramp. They also provide designated left turn bike lanes to make it easier for a bicyclist in busy traffic. Next, we visited Bern, Switzerland. Bicycle parking is allowed on specially designated portions of some downtown streets. They use yellow pavement markings for bike lanes and pedestrian crossings. Look at how prominent the pedestrian crossing is here. Yellow markings are also used for bus lanes, and they have combination bus-bike lanes. Special bike route signs are very informative. The older portion of downtown Bern is centuries old and was very charming with an old world feel to it. In the newer portion of Bern, a very popular transit station is easily accessible for bicyclists. This is a very pleasant pedestrian environment to explore. As with Denmark, we were very impressed with bicyclists' behavior. They were very mellow and law-abiding. Bicycling is embedded in the Swiss human-powered mobility plan, with walking, hiking, bicycling, and skating as elements. Pedestrian traffic is considered as one single system with three parts: motorized private, human-powered, and public transit. The human-powered mobility role in metropolitan traffic is 1. Full accessibility inside built-up areas, and 2. Linking private and public transportation. Look at how many people you've seen moved in this video clip with no car traffic at all. They have two-stage driver's licensing and strict legislation and enforcement on speeding and drunk driving. Car access to some portions of downtown is restricted by these key card actuated retractable bollards. The Aar River bisects Bern in a deep river valley. This creates a need for significant bridge structures, such as the Kornhausbrücke Bridge in the background here. You can see the tram traveling over it. Look at how skillfully the oncoming cyclist is crossing the tram tracks. Also look at how many pedestrians there are in this clip and how well bicyclists interact with them. Bicyclists share the road with motorized traffic and the trams on the bridge, and then are routed onto cycle tracks, taking them behind the tram stops so they do not create conflicts with transit users. The trams run frequently, including 9-minute headways on Sundays. It was on a Bern tram that Albert Einstein had his breakthrough insight on the theory of relativity. We were impressed with how well Swiss bicyclists operated on this shared lane condition. There's tram traffic, car traffic, and bike traffic within the travel lanes, and many pedestrians using the sidewalks of the bridge. Consider how American cyclists might react to a similar situation. But for the Swiss, it works. Note the absence of any pavement markings beyond the white centerline marking. They do not use yellow for centerline markings in Switzerland. Here is a ground level view showing the transition between the on-street bicycling across the bridge to the off-street cycle track bicycling behind the transit stop. The curvature works out well, and cyclists seem to obey it. We were impressed with how this worked for people. The trams are actually quite narrow. This allows them to navigate the sharp curvature of the downtown streets that were laid out 500 to 1,000 years ago. Swiss helmet usage was 14% 10 years ago and is now 38%. But compulsory helmet laws are viewed as likely to reduce the number of bicyclists and thereby reducing the safety that results from large numbers of bicyclists. For the Swiss, the cardiovascular benefits of increased public bicycling are better than requiring helmets. Swiss bicycle accidents resulting in fatalities and severe injuries are 72% due to collisions, 23% due to left turns, 1/2 of which are the bicyclist's fault, and 13% at crossings. Children cannot ride a bike on their own until they are 8. The federal plan on transport is to develop human-powered mobility in built-up areas, eliminating the negative side effects of railway lines and highways on human-powered mobility, and coordinate national human-powered mobility networks. Most Swiss traffic problems occur in densely populated areas. They have their own national standards for signs, pavement markings, and traffic signals that are different from the Vienna Convention. Our Swiss host described examples of their land use policy that favored transit and bicycle use. The policy for new development was that it must occur along corridors with existing or planned transit service or bicycle routes. Note the through movement and left turn bike lanes with yield markings in advance of the pedestrian crosswalk here. Swiss pedestrian signals are actuated by push buttons that illuminate when pressed, confirming that the call has been sent. The Swiss routinely use flashing yellow beacons where right turns would conflict with pedestrians. Notice that there are 3 sets of pedestrian signals here, so that the pedestrian crossing is broken into individual phasings to get across this 4-lane street with 2-lane right turn bypass. Again, here's a close-up of the flashing yellow beacons and the 3-phase pedestrian signal heads. This intersection approach has a through right bike lane with a left turn bike lane located adjacent to the curb. Here is a forward view of the same intersection approach. Again, note the left turn bike lane adjacent to the curb, then the through right bike lane, and the through right bike lane advanced stop bar, allowing cyclists to queue in front of the motorists who have their own white-colored stop bar. We were routinely impressed by the ability of Swiss bicyclists to obey traffic signals. Note that they are queuing in the through bike lane while the left turn bike signal gave a green. The left turning cyclist has proceeded. The through movement cyclists are still waiting for their own green, and at that point in time, they continue on. They do not ignore traffic signals as we are so commonly used to seeing here in the United States. This close-up shows the left turn bicycle signal and the through right signal that is used by motorists. Note the flashing yellow beacon reminding motorists to yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk. Again, here is a view of the left turn bike lane. Note the angled stop bar and the geometry of the left turning movement that will result from this layout. Both of these cyclists are waiting patiently for the left turn bicycle signal, whereas a U.S. bicyclist probably would have just continued on through the intersection during a gap. These bicyclists wait, knowing that the signal has detected them and will give them a full left turn green bike phase. From the median, this is what the bicyclist's left turn movement looks like. Here is the corresponding pedestrian crosswalk at the same intersection. Notice the median refuge provided, and the crossing is made with 2 sets of pedestrian traffic signals. Also note there's a pedestrian push button on the median for a slower pedestrian who needs to put in a second call to get additional time to get across the intersection. Also note there's no bicyclists on the street charging through the pedestrian crosswalk, creating conflicts with the pedestrians, as the pedestrian signals operate on their own phasing. Another example of a median-protected pedestrian crossing made with 2 sets of pedestrian signals, operating on their own timing to provide a phased, sequential crossing of the street. This worked out well, and I'm about to press the button again adjacent to the camera to put in another call. Note that the near side gives the green prior to the far side. Here is a median view of the previous intersection. Note the pedestrian warning beacons both at the near side traffic signal as well as at the pedestrian signal at the crosswalk. Also note the relationship of the signal to the bicycle left turn signal on the same signal pole. We are now looking at the crosswalk where you just saw the cars turning to the right in the previous clip. Bear with me, this clip lasts a little bit and will test your patience, but I wanted to show you how well this intersection works. There are 3 sets of pedestrian signals here. You see the flashing yellow beacon at a median refuge between the opposing directions of travel, and there's a 3rd set of pedestrian signals at the far side of the intersection leg where there's a right turn bypass. Each of these pedestrian signals is set on their own timing to provide the maximum amount of crossing time for a pedestrian. The signal that is currently red is for the near side crossing of the intersection. Then the portion of the road where you just saw the bicyclist run the red light was for the opposing movement of traffic. And there's a 3rd set of signals where the red car just went through. It's a right turn bypass. Notice how these signals function. Again, maximizing the amount of green time given to pedestrians so they can cross each of the 3 individual crossings as often as possible without delay. This setup was quite interesting. Also notice that there are pedestrian push buttons on each of the pedestrian islands, allowing pedestrians to put in additional calls if they need additional time. This system worked quite well and was quite sophisticated in that it maximized the amount of pedestrian and traffic movement at any given time.